This story had happened, before Christmas. The husband called their son, and he said, and their son lived in New York, and he said, "Son, I have to tell you, your mom and I are getting a divorce." And his son said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, 50 years, that's all I can take. That's all we can take. The misery is enough." And he said, "What are you talking about, Dad?" And he said, "We just can't stay on the side of each other anymore." And the dad said, we're just sick of each other, and we're sick of talking about it, so call your sister in Chicago and tell her. And he said, no, don't do it, Dad, don't do it. And he said, give me some time to work on this. So anyway, the son calls his sister in Chicago and tells her, Mom and Dad are getting a divorce. And she says, like heck they are. We're going to put a stop to this. And so she calls her parents immediately and screams at the father, "You are not going to get a divorce. Don't you do a single thing until I get there. And my brother is going to be there too. Do you hear me? Do not do a thing." And she hung up. And the husband looked at his wife and said, "Well, it's settled. The kids are coming for Christmas and they're paying their own way." I know the holidays are over, but still have a little of that Christmas spirit. It's fun to start with a laugh and then go to the Lord and get serious. Oh, Father God, we praise you, our mighty, mighty, holy, wonderful, loving God. We thank you for all you have created for us, for all you have provided for us. Lord, most of all, for your love and for your Son. As we open your word, open each of our hearts and minds to your message. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, now hopefully you picked up 2 handouts today when you came in, and always check every week to see if we have a new handout. Most of the time we don't, but occasionally we do, and some days like today we have 2. And one of them is a genealogy sheet. And so what this is, I should have had this last week. This takes the line of Jesus, the lineage of Jesus, beginning with Adam. And so if you look at it, this genealogy, and this was put together by Lee Evans, who is head of our media team. And it begins with God, and then it goes down to Adam and Eve. And you'll notice that Adam's name is highlighted with a little purple box. And there's information all along the sheet, but it follows the line of Jesus. Like Adam and Eve had 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth. And Seth's name is highlighted because he is the one that's the line that's going to lead to Jesus. And then it goes down from Seth to Noah, 10 generations. From Noah, actually, it goes through his first son, Shem. He has 3 sons, but the line that's going to follow to Jesus follows through Shem, all the way 10 generations to Abraham. And then Abraham, it shows his 2 one wife, 1 concubine, if you will, Sarah and Hagar, but the son of the promise is Isaac, not Ishmael, so Isaac's name is highlighted. Then you go to page 2, and Isaac and Rebekah marry. They have twins, and so Esau and Jacob, but Jacob is the one of the promise and the line that leads to Jesus. Then it goes down through his 4 wives, his 12 sons, and son number 4, Judah, which we'll be talking about some today, in addition to Joseph. You see Joseph down there, but he's not as great and as wonderful as he is. He's not the line that leads to Jesus. Judah is, and that's the line that first leads to King David, the kings of Israel, and all the way down to Jesus. So this is, hole punched. It's ready to go in your notebook with your other notes. And I have found visuals for me are very, very helpful and important and useful. So I hope that will be the same way for you as well. Now, as we begin this last major section of the book of Genesis, we come to really one of the most interesting people in the entire Bible, and especially in the Old Testament. This guy, Joseph, is pretty spectacular. He is one of only two major characters in the entire Old Testament of which nothing evil is spoken of. The other one is Daniel, that we'll come to later on in the Old Testament. But in this, his story helps answer the question that you may have if you just pop open into the book of Exodus: how did God's people end up in Egypt? So through the life of and the story of Joseph, we see how the family, these 12 sons and their 12 families, these become the 12 tribes of Israel and eventually the nation of Israel. How did they end up leaving the promised land and going to Egypt? Why are they there? So Joseph's story will show us that. Now, you also have another handout. It's a black and white, and it's front and back. And this has 50 different ways in which Joseph, the life of Joseph, foreshadows Jesus Christ. And really, scholars have come up with 100. I picked what I thought were the top 50 to put on this handout. And we see in his life that he foreshadows Jesus. For example, he was loved by his father. He was hated by his brothers, rejected by his own people. He was envied and sold into the hands of enemies. He was punished unjustly. He is highly exalted, and he receives a Gentile bride during his rejection by the brethren. So that's just a few that I just throw out there. But keep these, as I go through his life, I will not touch on every one of these. I'll hit on some of them. But again, put it in your notebook. Go back and look over these, because it's amazing, the things that point ahead to Jesus in this. And you've heard me say before, from Genesis 1:1, Jesus is part of this book. Beginning to end, Jesus is in every book of the Bible. In the Old Testament, he is prophesied, he is foreshadowed, he is a typology, if you would, or he is prefigured. Sometimes he is there as the pre-incarnate Christ, but from beginning to end, this is a book about Jesus. In Hebrews 10:5-7, it says this: consequently, when Christ came into the world, he said, "Behold, I have come to do your will, O God, as it is written in the scroll of the book." And so this scroll of the book from Genesis to Revelation is about Jesus, and he came to do the will of the Father. So we will see in the life of Jesus many ways, the life of Joseph, many ways in which he foreshadows Jesus. Now, he's not, I said there's no evil spoken of him. That does not mean he is perfect. Jesus Christ is the only perfect person who has ever lived. All right, but he is a good guy. And let's face it, after studying Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, woo! Oh my goodness, it's good to come to somebody in the family line here who is on track, who has ethics and character, and he has all of that. So let's open our textbook to Genesis 37 as we study this. 1. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. Okay, that later becomes Israel. These are the generations of Jacob. And when it says these are the generations of Jacob, it's backing up to the previous 2 chapters that we covered last week, where a lot of genealogy was in there. But I want to stop before we get right on to Joseph and ask you this: is there something that is discouraging you in your present circumstances? And maybe it's your health, maybe it's a financial situation, a relationship, maybe it's spiritual. Is there something discouraging you? And perhaps it's due to nothing that you did. I mean, a lot of times we bring our troubles on ourselves, don't we? But sometimes it's like we're pretty much doing what we're supposed to be doing, and yet We see it over and over that bad things happen even to good people. And we're going to see that in the life of Joseph. So if there is something that's discouraging you in your present circumstances, hopefully his story can give you encouragement. Then I want to ask you this. Is your character being tested today? Or in general? Is your character being tested? Because Joseph's is going to be tested. And so we can learn from Joseph how to handle life when our character, our ethics are being tested. And then the third thing, how do you handle that testing of the circumstances and character? And I feel like we will walk away today with some things that really can help us in our daily walk of life. So, let's finish the second part of verse 2, which says, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. Now, his mother, Rachel, had died. We saw that in the previous chapters last week. His mom has died, but he still has the two servants of Leah and Rachel. They're still around. And it says, and Joseph brought a bad report of them, his brothers, to their father. So here they are, Jacob and family. They're living in Canaan. They're living near Hebron. We saw that last week. That's kind of where they ended up. And Joseph is feeding the sheep with his brothers. They are shepherds. Okay, just throw this in. Who was the good shepherd? That's Jesus in the New Testament, okay? So he's tending his sheep. He's 17. He's way down. He's son number 11 out of the 12. Benjamin isn't with him yet. He's still too young. And he goes back and gives a bad report to his dad about his brothers. Verse 3. Now Israel, and remember, God changed Jacob's name from Jacob, deceiver, to Israel. And so that's where we get the name for the nation of Israel, is through this father. His sons are the tribes of Israel, then it's the nation of Israel, like I've said. So part of the time it's going to call him Israel, part of the time it's going to call him Jacob. It's the same person. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. Okay, we know that it's not good to have favorites in the family, don't we? Don't we know that can lead to problems and issues and jealousy? And in this case, it's going to lead to more than just jealousy. But it's to the point that he singles Joseph out and gives him a very colorful coat. And the word here for coat is that it is a long-sleeved coat, all right? It is not what most shepherds would wear. Shepherds would wear a sleeveless tunic in those days because they were better able to do their work sleeveless. If you were wearing long sleeves, that was a sign that you were kind of in charge, that you were maybe even a ruler or a person of authority. So not only was it colorful, but it was long-sleeved. And so this stood out. Verse 4. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So it was so evident to them who Daddy's favorite was that they hated him. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. Verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Excuse me. He said to them, hear this dream I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. What is a sheaf? what is a sheaf and what are sheaves and how are they standing? Well, that's grain. That's long stalks of grain that have been wrapped, cut, wrapped, bound together, and then they just stand them up. And later they would collect them and go and thresh the grain and so forth. But he's going, hey guys, I had this dream and there were all these sheaves and your sheaves bowed down to mine. Verse 8, his brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed another dream. And he told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed have to come and bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind, probably because he had himself received many dreams from God. Now, there are those Bible scholars who would say that Joseph wasn't such a great guy, that telling the brothers of this dream shows pride on his part. Others would say, no, it's not pride, it's just not maybe that he was very smart to tell them this. I disagree with both of those because I think God wanted not just Joseph to know about these dreams, but he wanted all his brothers and his father to know about this dream here 20 years before it's going to be fulfilled. All right? So that when it does, they can go, okay, we see God's plan that was put in place way back 20 years ago. God was putting everything right into place. Because guess what? God is putting everything right into place. That is what's going on here. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel came to Joseph and said, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? And come, I will send you to them. And he said, here I am. So here the father is sending the son to go to the brothers. And he is eager to do it. He will do whatever his father commands him to do, just as Jesus would. And so he said to him, go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and give me a word, and bring me the word. And he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and there a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man said, they have gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went with his brothers and found them at Dothan. Okay, so where is Dothan on the map? Okay, here's the land of Canaan, and Dothan is up in this area, kind of up high. They had come from Hebron to Shechem, which is right here, and then on up to Dothan. And you would do that if you had a lot of livestock. You had to go where they could feed. And so that would have been why they were there. And it was Dothan was a city that was on the ancient, highway. So it was a place that a lot of people could get to. Then verse 18. Okay, verse 17, at the end of it, it says that he went after his brothers and he found them. Okay? And then verse 18, it says, they saw him from afar. Now, how do you think they recognized him? From afar. Yeah. He kind of stood out, didn't he? So they saw him from afar, and before he came to them, he conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Okay. How many of you are Donny Osmond fans. Because he is one of the guys that played, okay, one person was brave enough to raise their hand. Thank you. Okay, there's some others, yeah. He played Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which was a Broadway show. And in that, yeah, there's the Dreamcoat. Many other people have played that role, but if you Google it online and you try to watch it, it's going to be Donny Osmond. So it was, honestly, that musical really pretty accurately, in a fun way, tells the story of Joseph. So if you've never watched it, you might want to go on YouTube and take a look. Okay, there's Kramer, because everybody knows about Joseph and his, multicolored coat, right? And so everybody has a take on it. But the story is so good that, yeah, even Broadway wanted to make a show about it. But the real story is so much more powerful and so much more meaningful. So let's continue looking at it today. Verse 20, come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits or cisterns. So out there where they were, there would be these pits where they would be hollowed out and rainwater would come and run to it, and they would be able to store up some water and feed their livestock, their cattle. And so there was a cistern there, and they're saying, well, let's just throw him into the pit. And then we'll see what then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Hey, yeah, there he is. There comes Mr. Fancy Coat. Let's just get him, throw him into the pit, wait for some wild animal to come and get him, and if they doesn't, we'll say that's what happened anyway when we tell Dad. Verse 21. But Reuben, okay, that's the oldest brother, number one son. But Reuben heard it, and he rescued him out of their hands, saying, no, let's not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no more blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. And he did this that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and they threw him into a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. Now, as the oldest son, even though he's messed up some too, we saw that last week, he's still kind of taking charge and responsibility for his younger brother, Joseph. And he's like, okay, throw him in the pit, and his plan is all along, I'll come back later, I'll rescue him, I'll get him back to Dad, everything will be fine and good. And he goes about what he's doing. So they take him, they throw him into the pit, and then, verse 25, then they sat down to eat. Okay, it shows how callous they were. They threw him into this pit. You can only imagine that he's screaming, hollering, come get me. Let me out. What's going on, guys? But they just sit down and eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. So here's a caravan of people who are spice traders, and they're on their way to Egypt. And verse 26, then Judah, okay, like I said earlier, Judah, that's the messianic line. When I say messianic, it has to do with the Messiah, which is Jesus. Messiah is the Old Testament Hebrew word. Christ is the New Testament Greek word. Means the same thing, okay? So Judah is the messianic line. It's also referred to as the royal line because the kings of Israel will come through the line of Judah. But it goes all the way down to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings. But Judah's going to speak up here. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. So he's like, let's not kill him. What good is that? Let's just sell him. Better, eh? And it says, then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Now, that was kind of the going price for a slave back in that day. That was about, 20 pieces of silver. And that's what his brothers sell him for. In the New Testament, we have Jesus, sold for 30 pieces, which at that time was the going price for a slave. And Judas, one of his brothers, sold him for that amount. It says they sold him, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, on our world map of the ancient days that we've been looking at, not world map, Middle Eastern map, we saw over here where Abraham started off, what God had called him to, the promised land, and rather than cutting across the Arabian desert, no, he goes up the highway here and down the highway, and they're right in here. But this road is, and there were actually two highways. One was the King's Highway and one was the Way of the Sea. Those roads were so important because they connected 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and all kinds of trade took place along there. So here's these traders from Gilead, which is on this side. They come across, they're going down the highway, they get to Dothan, they buy Joseph, and they're taking him on their way down to Egypt down here, where they are going to they're going to resell him, is what they're going to do. We've got another map, that shows it just a little more zoomed in of where they would have gone as they were taking Joseph. Verse 29. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw Joseph was not in the pit, he's been out shepherding, he comes back, he expects to find Joseph in the pit, he's going to rescue him. Joseph's not there. He's afraid his brothers have killed him, right? So what does he do? He tore his clothes. Now that is an expression in the Bible of grief, of sorrow, of mourning. And so he is upset. He rips his clothes there. And he returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and where shall I go? So he's worried, but he seems to be a little bit more worried about himself than Joseph. And me, what about me? Where am I going to go? Because he doesn't want to have to explain this to his father. Verse 31. Then they took Joseph's robe, because it was left there, and they slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. So they obviously answered Reuben and said, we sold him, he's gone, but we've got the robe here. We're just going to, we're going to kind of tear it up. We're going to put some goat blood on it. We'll take it back to Dad, and that'll, that was their plan. Verse 32, and they sent the robe of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. And Jacob tore his garments and put on sackcloth on his loins and mourned his son for many days. So we see here the grief that he's experiencing, but we also see some things that he should have learned about earlier in his life. For one thing, his mom and dad played favorites. His dad liked Esau more, and his mom liked Jacob more, and that caused family problems. The second thing was he should have learned. His name means deceiver, but he should have learned because earlier in his life, he was the deceiver. If you'll recall, he and his mom, Rebecca, made a plan so that he would receive the blessing of the firstborn. And how did they do that? They killed a goat. They took the skin of it and they put it on Jacob's arms and on his neck so that he would feel hairy like his brother Esau, whose name means what? Hairy. And they deceived his father Isaac into giving him the blessing that should have technically gone to Esau. And so here now, all these years later, Jacob is being deceived by his sons, who are also taking a goat and killing it. You know, over and over, we see in the Bible, what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. And so he is experiencing that. Verse 35. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol," that's the grave, the place of the dead, "to my son mourning." In other words, I'm going to be upset the rest of my life. Don't even try to comfort me. I am sick over this. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him, Joseph, in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So now we find out where Joseph is, that he ends up being bought, by this high-ranking official down in Egypt. And at this time, Egypt is a powerful, maybe the most powerful empire in the world. They've been powerful for at least 1,000 years at this point. There are already pyramids in Egypt at this point. The Sphinx is already there. I mean, it is a place that is not just architecturally impressive, but these people are educated, they are wise, and it is a happening place. And so that's where Joseph has been sent, and he's in the household of an affluent officer of Pharaoh. Then we come to chapter 38, and it's kind of an intermission already in the life of Joseph. Joseph is not in this chapter. It's all about Judah. And then we'll get back to Joseph in 39 for the rest of Genesis. But right now, it's just like, okay, let's stop, intermission. Let's talk about Judah. Verse 1, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and he went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezbit when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn. Okay, so then many years pass, right? Because now that firstborn is old enough to get married. So we have a great amount of time that has passed. So Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. We don't know what he did, but we know it was bad. It was wicked. And God determined, that's it. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother." Now, this is called the custom of the Levirate marriage. And it's not a law yet, but it's already a custom. When we get to Mount Sinai and going on into the Promised Land, Deuteronomy 25 sets this as a standard for the Jewish people. And what it is if a man dies without an heir, no children, then his next closest relative, which in this case was his next younger brother, is to take that wife, marry her, give her an heir, because then that one who has died has a name to be passed down and has heirs, and the widow has provision, has someone to grow up and care for her and take care of her. So that's what it's called, is a Levirate marriage. And we see it's going to even come to place in the book of Ruth. And so there it's called the kinsman redeemer. And we know that Jesus is a picture of our kinsman redeemer. But anyway, that's what's going on here. That was the custom. And so that's why when Judah says to second oldest son, go into your brother's wife, perform the duty of a brother-in-law, and raise up offspring for your brother. In other words, they won't be counted as your children. You know, that once there's a male child born, that's it. They're his. And then you can go back with your wife and you can have your own children. It says in verse 9, but Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste his semen on the ground so as not to give the offspring to his brother. Now, how many of you are going, I can't believe that's in the Bible? Yeah. You're just going, hey, you never heard this story in Sunday school, right? Yeah. Oh, it gets worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Okay. It says, and what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So God didn't like that. That's the end of Onan. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up, for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained at her father's house. Okay, so Tamar's first husband dies, second husband dies. Daddy's saying, there's no way I'm giving my third son to her. And so I'll just say, hey, go live with your dad a while till he gets older, till he grows up. So she goes. But time passes because it says, in the course of time. So time has gone on. The wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. So Judah's own wife now has passed away. And when Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up and she had not been given him in marriage. Okay, so she's going to devise a plan because for that time and day, without a husband or children, you had not only no real standing in the community, but you had no one to care for and no one to care for you as you grew older. And you couldn't go. She wasn't allowed to just go marry anybody. She was only really allowed to go marry the kinsman redeemer there, that next closest relative. So here she has been just kind of stuck. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. And he turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? And he answered, I will give you a young goat from the flock. Well, who could turn that down? I mean, seriously. In that day, that was something, okay? It's like, I will give you that little Mustang convertible. Just come on in. But she's wise. She says, if you give me a pledge until you send it. In other words, I'm not just going to take your word for it. What are you going to leave as collateral? What are you going to leave as a pledge until I get the goat? And he said, well, what pledge shall I give you? And she replied, your signet, which would have been his ring that identified him, your cord, that would have identified him, and your staff. So in other words, give me your ring, your driver's license, and a credit card, and I'll hold it till I get the goat or the car, whichever one you want to think of. Okay? So he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. And then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. So she's off with the prostitute outfit back into the widowhood outfit and on her way. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he could not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enam at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. And also the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, well, then let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. So, here we go. And Judah has also become a deceiver because of what happened with Joseph in the coat and all. Now he's being deceived he's being deceived by Tamar. Verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral or has committed prostitution. Why? 3 months, what happens? Ladies, 3 months, something starts popping, right? So it's evident that she's pregnant. And word gets back to Judah. Your daughter-in-law has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Yeah. He's like, we can't have any immorality in this family. For goodness sakes. Burn her. And it says, and as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are. The signet, you know that ring with the big J on it? The cord, and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. So he acknowledged here that he was the one in the wrong. From the beginning, he was just as guilty as her, but yet he was willing to condemn her until it was found out and proven, she's pretty wise, that he was in the wrong. Verse 27. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb, seems to run in the family. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Okay, now why would she do that? Because they knew there were twins. That was pretty evident. And so when the first one came out, they go ahead and they tie a scarlet thread around it so that when they're both out, you know, they might be identical twins. They might look exactly alike. And so you've got to identify which one is the firstborn, because the firstborn gets the double portion of the belongings when the father dies and becomes head of the family. There's a lot of to do about that firstborn child. And so, you know, that little hand pops out, scarlet thread is tied on it, but then guess what happens next? It says that, but as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez, and Perez means breach. And it says, afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So here's Tamar. She had twins, and, there's a thread on one hand, and then he wasn't the firstborn, and all of this. But let's just think for a minute, why in the world is this story in the Bible? I mean, there's a lot of things that happen. They're not all in the Bible, but everything that is in the Bible is there for a reason. There is a purpose in us studying this wild story about Judah's sin. So what is it? What is it? Well, as I mentioned, Judah is the line that leads to Jesus. And Tamar is part of that line. We're going to see about 10 generations later, we're going to come to Ruth and Boaz as descendants of Judah and Tamar. And then that is the line that leads to King David and eventually to Jesus Christ. So that when you open the New Testament, and the first gospel that is there is the Gospel of Matthew, and it begins with the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, the son of David. And then it goes specifically through that genealogy, beginning with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and Tamar. Women aren't usually listed in the genealogy, and yet she is. In fact, in Matthew's account of that long genealogy, 5 women are mentioned, and 3 of them are immoral. Tamar, Rahab, and Bathsheba. The other 2 are very moral, Ruth and Mary. And so this story is here because it gives us a picture of Jesus' family tree. And guess what? It wasn't a perfect family tree. How many of you have a family tree that's like, there's some people in it you'd like not to, tell people about? Yeah, and thanks to 23andMe, we're finding out more all the time. Yeah. My mother, for the longest time, I didn't know that her 2 uncles rode and fought with Billy the Kid because she was so embarrassed about it until this book came out and their names were in it, And it was like, I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know. But Jesus' genealogy is not some line of perfect people. It's people that are just regular people who mess up, but by the grace of God, they are still part of the story. God does not disown them. He restores them time after time after time. And God's promises are true regardless of how much we mess up. God does not change his promises. They are good and they are true, and we can count on them. So that's why this story is there. Chapter 39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and we're going to see that term used over and over throughout the rest of Joseph's life, that the Lord was with him. And it says, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. And as the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and attended him, and made him an overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. And from the time that he had made him an overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for the sake of Joseph. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field, so he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. Because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now, it would have been real easy at this point for Joseph when he, because we're back into the life of Joseph, for him to get to Egypt and be just very, very discouraged. and disheartened. And man, I've been stripped of everything from my coat to my place in the family to everything. I've got nothing left, and now I'm a slave, and I'm in this household. And he could have been very discouraged, and he could have given up. But no, he didn't. He trusts in the Lord. His character is wholesome. His decision-making is good, and God blesses him as a result of that. And not just him, but even this Egyptian's household is blessed because of Joseph. And then it tells us, and now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. There's only two other men in the Bible that are described as handsome, and that's David and his son Absalom. So Joseph must have been a very striking person, and that may play into what happens next in this story here. I mean, sometimes being good looking can be a curse. I wouldn't know anything about it. Okay, verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself. Because you are his wife, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Ultimately, all sin is a sin against God. Is it also a sin against Potiphar? Yeah, it is. Is it a sin against other people often when we mess up? Yes, it is. But ultimately, what matters most is that it is a sin against God. Don't kid yourself. That little thing you did, it is a sin against God. And he recognizes this. Verse 10. And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. He is such a man of integrity here. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." So here's some entrapment here. She picks out a time when everybody else is out of the house and she knows Joseph is coming in. She grabs him one more time. It says she's been doing this day after day after day. And at this point, we don't see it here, but we can work it on a timeline later that shows he's been living there about 11 years, okay? So we don't know how much of that time she had been trying to seduce him, but it says she grabbed his coat, said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." So here she is lying about what happened. She's so angry that he would not sleep with her, so she's just going to get rid of him by telling this lie. Now, what Joseph did was absolutely the right thing. He got up and he got out. And when we are faced with sin and temptation like this, that's what we need to do, is get up and flee. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God with your body." And then 1 Corinthians 10:13 tells us this, No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man, but God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will always provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So yeah, temptation's going to come our way, but God's will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we can handle. He's going to provide an escape route. There's going to be an exit. We have to look for it, and we have to run for it. Run for that escape. That's what Joseph did. Verse 16. Then she laid up her garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought home among us came in to me to laugh at me, but as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Okay, so Potiphar comes home. His wife tells him the story, the lie. He's angry, and he had every right to have Joseph executed for attempted rape. And yet he doesn't. And he doesn't have him just sent off to any prison, but the king's prison, which may be, like one of those white-collar crime prisons, all right? Maybe not quite as severe. Why would he do that? Boy, he has been so blessed by Joseph. And maybe he even kind of suspects that his wife wasn't telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We don't know. But we do know that the consequences could have been much greater, and that God is ultimately the one who spared Joseph's life and is with him now. Even in prison, it says, he finds favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So here he is, and his situation again could look hopeless. Like, one more thing, God, really? I've been sold. I've been taken to Egypt. I've been accused falsely, as was Jesus. And he is silent before his accusers, as was Jesus. And now I'm in prison for the rest of my life. That's what that would have meant. And yet, he takes life one day at a time, doing the best he can. Right where he is, over and over. He does the best work right where he is, day after day. And his diligence, his positive attitude are soon noticed by this keeper of the prison. And it's just a model to us of what should we be doing day after day, whether it's at home or at school or at work or with some organization or whatever we are a part of. Be diligent, do your best, have a good attitude, stick with it. And God blesses him. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "So whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God." So Joseph's not doing it for himself. He's doing it to honor God. And that should be our attitude as well. Verse 22, "And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." So we see here that the Lord continues to be with Joseph despite his circumstances, which we all have to agree on that they were not ideal. God is with him. And he is reaping what he has sown in a good sense, in that God is going to continue to bless him for his character, for his ethics. You know, there is nothing in the Old Testament or the New Testament that says if you do good, though, everything's going to be great. The sun's going to always be shining on you, and you're not going to get sick or have a divorce or problems or financial issues. It's going to be, smooth going. No, it doesn't say that. In fact, Jesus tells us in the New Testament, in this world you will have tribulation. But I've overcome the world. And so now Jesus is with you and with me as believers who have committed our lives to him. And so regardless of our circumstances, he will always be with us. And we will be blessed. So does Joseph's life encourage you in your present circumstances? Are there some things there that give you some hope and encouragement? What character traits does Joseph display that maybe you need to latch on to? How has your integrity been tested? Because from time to time we're all tested. And how should you handle your circumstances and your temptations? I think we can look at the life of Joseph as a model, not a perfect model, but as a model with some real good, clear-cut guidelines that are helpful to each and every one of us. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Oh God, we thank you for your word, which is living and powerful, and it is truth. Thank you for the life of Joseph. Thank you for his example, for his character and integrity, for his ability to face temptation and flee from it. Lord, may we gain these characteristics as well. Lord, we also see that because he put his faith and trust in you, that you were with him every step of the way. And Lord, we thank you that because of our faith in Jesus Christ as our Savior, you are with us every step of the way, wherever we go. And we thank you for that, God. We thank you. I ask your blessings on all those who are here in this place today and all those who are listening or watching online. May you be with them, and may they follow your words so that all we eat or drink and everything we do, oh God, that it may bring glory to you. In Jesus' name, amen.